exactly is a rogue wave? Technically, it's just, a big wave that comes out of nowhere. They can be caused by two big waves coming together and just creating a giant wave, or tons of other stuff causes them. But regardless of how they're caused, when you're out in the middle of the ocean in a little sailboat and you run into one, bad things happen. I know from experience. Funnily enough, what comes to my mind when I hear about a rogue wave, it's not a giant wave. It's more a dashed hope, a lost dream, or a sense of having lost control of my life. 11 months ago, I was headed out to live my dream. I was on my sailboat Wild Eyes in Open 40. She was an amazing boat, decked out with all new gear. She was really the perfect boat for me. She was high maintenance, hard to sail. She was a challenge, and that's what I was out there for. I loved sailing and loved my boat, loved everything about it. My whole team that had worked so hard to put together the whole campaign. Mentally, I was pretty tough. I had a healthy respect for the ocean, but also really, I knew what I could do. One thing I wasn't really mentally ready for was the possibility that my trip might end. That, I knew the facts. I knew that 50% of, most nonstop attempts fail. The odds are against me pretty much. But, I didn't think about that. I didn't want to let my mind get wrapped up in the thought of what if things don't work out? What if I don't make it? I was set on spending the next 6 months at sea. I was going to sail around the world, and I was going to do it nonstop. 10 days out of Marina Del Ray, I got my first rogue wave of sorts. I was headed into Cabo, San Lucas, Mexico. This wasn't a planned stop. It had become apparent a few days out of Marina Del Rey that there were some issues with the charging systems on my boat. And already I was having to put into port for repairs. I pulled into Cabo, and all the guys hopped on board. We got to work straight away. And a few hours later, it was starting to get dark, so we decided to wrap things up for the night. They all hopped off the boat one at a time, and I was kind of just standing around there, messing around, prolonging having to take my first step on dry land. And that minute ended up to be a little bit longer than a minute, because eventually one of the guys from my team said, "Come on, Abby, it's time to get off." And it was a tough mental barrier to get around. But eventually I went over and hopped off the boat, and pretty soon all the worries and stuff were replaced by the humorous fact that I couldn't walk in a straight line. I was walking around like a drunk sailor. I mean, that's what happens when you spend a lot of time at sea. But, simple pleasures. It's the great thing about, one of the best things about life is not letting worries and things like that cover up the funny little things that happen. It really makes life worth living, and, I really came to realize how important that is on my trip. And during my trip, my mental strength was put to the test more than I ever could have imagined it would be. I was out of Cabo and on my way again. Fast forward a few weeks, and I was headed towards one of the biggest milestones of my trip, Cape Horn. It's the Everest of sailing. And I was pretty excited. As the day grew on, I was getting more and more excited. I was down below sitting at my chart desk when all of a sudden the autopilot screen went blank. The boat started spinning around, so I jumped outside and grabbed the tiller right before the boat jibed, headed her into the wind, jumped back down below, crawled into the back compartment, hooked up the backup autopilot, then ran back out, got on course, turned it on, and nothing. It was dead. The main one and the backup one. I turned the boat back into the wind, dropped all my sails, and got back down into my little cabin. When the sails are down, the boat's just rolling all over the place. There's nothing controlling you, nothing steering you, so every which way the waves toss you. I got on the phone with the guys on my team. I had a great support team back home, and I started talking to them, going back and forth about what to do, trying to fix it. I ended up there in the tiny back compartment of my boat, laying on my back with a flashlight in my teeth, using a nail file as a makeshift jeweler's screwdriver. It was freezing cold out. I was back there for a few hours, and a few more hours, and then a few more hours. About 10 hours later, I was back at my chart desk on the phone with my team again. I was scribbling autopilot schematics at my arm in Sharpie. I was starting to have a little bit of a hard time understanding what the guys were saying. I mean, I'd been up for a few nights before this dealing with weather and stuff, and they were having to repeat themselves a few times before it would finally register and I'd get what they were saying. I remember at one point, one of the guys asked, do you want to take a break? Because just pick things back up in the morning. And I remember kind of laughing to myself, like, wait, seriously? I'm wasting time. I can't do that. And I looked outside, and it was already starting to get light out. It was already morning. No point in sleeping then. So another hour passed, and things weren't going anywhere. It was looking like I wouldn't be able to fix it. One last try, I decided. Fiddled around with a few more wires, jumped outside, and turned on the autopilot, and it worked. I'm not sure what made it work, but it did. And so, the guys on my team, they know me really well, and I'm not the type of person to jump up and down when I get excited. I just would have hit my head on something anyways, but, I have a happy voice, and when something really good happens, my voice just simply raises a few notes. And I almost jumped up and down then. That was pretty good to be able to get back on track. But, I set out with the whole entirely wrong mindset. I was out there looking for an adventure, but I'd planned it all out. I hadn't made room for any hiccups. I hadn't thought about, what if something goes wrong? What if I do have to stop? It wasn't until a couple months later that I realized what adventure really is. You can plan so far, but you can't plan the whole thing. And, things change when you're in an adventure. An adventure is going out into the unknown. My trip was the most amazing experience of my life. It seemed like every new day was the best, like the new best day, and every new sunset, the new best sunset, and each new storm, the new most amazing storm. But after 3 months at sea, I had to pull into Cape Town, South Africa, for more repairs. This ended the nonstop part of my trip, but definitely did not end my trip for good. A week in Cape Town, and I was back out. Leaving was pretty hard. I knew that much better what I was getting myself into. I knew that much better how hard it was going to be. But, I really had no idea quite how hard it was going to end up getting. Out of Cape Town, I was hit pretty hard, storm after storm. It wasn't the easy, life at sea that I'd known before that. Sure, I'd been through storms, but this was pretty big. I'd get slammed by a storm, and I'd have barely enough time to patch the boat back up before the next one would hit. And, the workload was starting to build up. One day, June 10th, I was hit by the biggest storm I'd ever seen. There was 60 knots of wind, 30-foot swells, and it was amazing. Me and my tiny little boat, we were surfing down these waves that were the size of 3-story buildings, and even bigger sometimes. And I was having a blast. A little bit of a thrill seeker. But, around the end of the day, it was starting to get dark out and things had calmed down. I had about 40 knots. So I went back down below. I was pretty exhausted from pulling all-nighters. It was hard. It was really hard. But there was work to be done. And so I got back down and started working on the engine. I'd just finished fixing the engine. I was putting the engine cover back on, standing in the middle of the cabin, and all of a sudden, I just went flying across the cabin. I didn't hear anything or not have any idea what had happened, and I remember I hit my head really hard, and things went black as I kind of fell up the side of the cabin, and I woke up on the roof. It was pitch black, there was water everywhere. And I remember just sitting there whispering to myself in complete disbelief, I'm rolling. And the thoughts started rolling in my mind, this is the end of my trip. You don't roll in a boat like this and keep your mast. The boat kept rolling. I was back upright in just a matter of seconds, and my mast was gone. All my communication was gone. I was 2,000 miles from any major search and rescue station. I was in one of the most remote places on Earth, and I was stranded there. My boat had been my life. Everything else, when I got wild eyes, everything else stopped. I poured every second I had into the shiny little spaceship. She was amazing. I'd poured my life into my trip. And in just a couple of seconds, it was all taken away. And now I was just sitting there wondering, is anyone going to be able to rescue me out here? How could this have happened? I've had so many plans, and this wasn't in it. This couldn't happen, but it already had. So I was starting to think, I failed. I failed at my trip. At least that's what all the critics are going to say. They're all going to be sitting back there. They were telling me I couldn't. Maybe I shouldn't have tried. Or maybe it wasn't entirely a failure. Maybe there's something a little more to success. Maybe every step you take towards it is something, a little success in itself. And, I had no idea what was going to happen to me on my trip. I never could have guessed. But Sully Sullenberger, he's the guy that landed a plane on the Hudson River crash landed a plane on the Hudson River. He had no idea that a bunch of birds were going to fly into his engine. I mean, it's not every day that happens. But he saved everybody in his plane. And, Bethany Hamilton, she's an amazing girl, great story. She's a famous surfer. She had no idea that when she was 13 years old that day, she would get attacked by a shark and lose her arm. But look at her now. I mean, life is uncharted. The unexpected will happen. We all get hit by our own rogue waves, but, just one last little thought is, what are you going to do when yours comes?